This week on Liberty 250, we're heading to the green fields of Lexington and Concord, not to relive a battle, but to meet the people who risked everything before the first shot was fired. What drives men and women to ride out into the dangerous night? What makes teenagers like Ebenezer Bowman stand their ground against the greatest military in the world? And why did the cry for liberty echo far beyond New England, into the streets of New York, the fields of Virginia, and even the Quaker meeting houses of Philadelphia? Before there was a war, there was a choice: to stand, to risk, to rebel. That's Liberty 250, Episode 9 this Tuesday on Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. It's time for Liberty to saddle up.
It's our third hour of a Tuesday morning on this 15th of July, 2025. Renewal by Anderson, our hour sponsor. Links to Dave Bowman and all of his work, there are on the show page at billmick.com. That page entitled AI, Epstein, and the Auto Pen. We covered all of that in our first couple of hours. You can always pick those up in the podcast section. They're top of the page at billmick.com, right next to those Florida Roundtable podcasts, by the way. So always available to you. But Dave Bowman making himself available to us on these Tuesdays. And in this 8 o'clock hour brings us Dave Does History. We've been conducting a series, Dave has, called Liberty 250, the march toward the 250th anniversary of the founding of this country. And today, Dave promises to take us to Lexington and Concord. Dave, you mentioned something in the AI Dave promo from yesterday, which was well done, by the way. I liked that promo. That there were decisions that people had to make before any of this all happened, and you're pointing to the folks in Lexington and Concord. I'm interested where we're going today.
Well, by the time we get to April 18th, 1775, after all the stuff we've talked about, all the Stamp Acts and Sugar Acts and all the Boston massacres and Tea Parties and all of this decade-long, more than a decade-long, struggle since the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763. And by now, the air in Massachusetts is just thick. I mean, it is oppressive. It is concerning. Britain has inflicted, and I use that term specifically, the coercive acts. They have shut down Boston. They have shut down Massachusetts' colonial government. And of course, the entire purpose of these laws that they passed is to punish, not to govern. And as a part of this, they have sent to Boston General Thomas Gage, who is one of the more unfortunate people in all of history, although I think he deserves further study, and we don't have time to do it here. But Thomas Gage is interesting because he is a veteran of the 7 Years' War. He has served in America. He has lots of friends in America, in Boston. And in fact, Bill, he has a wife who's from Boston. She knows everybody. She is Miss Society when it comes to Boston. She knows all the Loyalist people. She knows all the Patriot people. She's friends with everyone. And she's married to the guy that's in charge. He said, foreshadowingly, for over a decade now, the colonies have argued, they've petitioned, they've written essays, they've dumped tea in the water, and the British Parliament has answered with coercive acts, laws that were designed to punish, not govern. By now, Boston is closed, town meetings are restricted, government is back, done away with. It's like justice. It's not justice. It's the back of a hand. And Massachusetts, which was once the heart of Puritan resolve, is now under occupation, military occupation. It feels the full weight of the British Royal Crown. Gage has thousands of troops, and he has a single purpose: crush the rebellion before it catches fire. The problem, of course, is that he's too late. It's already caught fire. Gage knows that he cannot defeat this idea of liberty with soldiers, but he can try to choke it off a little bit by seizing weapons. And so on the night of April 18th, he gives orders. 700 British regulars will march out of Boston in the dark. The target is the town of Concord. It's about 20 miles away. The colonials there have been stockpiling arms and munitions. which they've been buying, by the way, primarily from the Dutch along the way. And they're actually looking for two people, Sam Adams and John Hancock. They believe that both of them are in nearby Lexington. The king wants these two people caught and basically hung. Gage is trying to walk a really fine line between orders and catastrophe, but he figures it's time to go get this stuff. Now, by the way, they've been doing this all summer long. They've been seizing arms stores all over the area. But, of course, the colonials are reacting to that, and by now, this large store of arms in Concord becomes the focal point. But, of course, the word gets out, as you know. Dr. Joseph Warren, who is one of the leading Patriots, we haven't talked much about him, but we'll get into him a little bit later. He's a guy that has ears everywhere. He's one of the most prominent people in Boston, Bill. Dr. Warren is one of those people that everybody knows, including, by the way, his good friend, Margaret Gage. Dr. Warren, quote unquote, finds out about the plan to seize the Concord Armory. We don't know how he found out. Nobody knows for sure. Well, we can guess.
The Boston girl married to the guy running the British effort?
He turns to two men, Paul Revere, William Dawes. He sends them out on their famous ride. Of course, Revere is a silversmith, but he's far more than that. He's a courier. He's the FedEx man. He's the man that when you absolutely had to get it there overnight, you send Paul Revere. Dawes is very similar. There are others involved. We don't have time to go through this whole thing, but you've heard the phrase, one if by land, two if by sea, right? Old North Church, we get two lamps. The British are crossing the Charles River, and off they go. Revere crosses the river. He slips past the British lines, and he mounts his horse, and the ride is on. There's something of a myth here. There is no shouting. There's no sword waving. There's no midnight movie. It's an urgent whisper from farm to farm. And that whisper simply says, the regulars are out. The regulars are out. The target they all know is Concord. Get ready, because they're coming.
And we pick it up in just a minute on Bill Mick Live. So this network of communication, Dave, seems to be pretty strong, and now they see the Brits are marching, and they're ready to try and take them on.
It is a fascinating moment in American history. And it's important to understand that it's not just Paul Revere. It's not just Dawes. It's not just these three guys that end up there famously telling Hancock and Adams that they need to get the heck out of there. There are dozens of these riders, and as the alarm spreads, it spreads like wildfire. And within hours, every town in eastern Massachusetts is stirring. Doors are opening, lanterns are being lit. Men are stepping out into cold. They pull on their boots. They pick up muskets that they haven't fired in years. They kiss their wives and children goodbye, and out the door they head. The question becomes why? Why does a man stand in the darkness, understanding that he might not come back? There is a line, and for some, that line has finally been crossed. The taxes, the soldiers, the insults to their town meetings and their property, and their sense of self. It's not just about Britain anymore. It's about being treated as less than a full person. They're not actually fighting to start a new nation. They have no comprehension of that yet as America, as a new nation. They still see themselves as Englishmen who are being abused. They're fighting to stop being pushed around and abused by the British, by Parliament. And this is important because on the evening of April 18th and the morning of April 19th, the colonials are mad at Parliament, not King George III. And that's a very important distinction to understand. These men will stand on Lexington Green that morning with their neighbors, and they will be there when this whole thing starts. All across Massachusetts, men are making the same choice. They're quiet men, they're young men, they're bombastic men, they're old men, but they're ordinary people who have had enough. When the sun rises on April 19th, they're waiting. They're not waiting for orders. They're not waiting for guarantees. They're waiting for the British regulars, the redcoats, or as I like to call them, the lobsterbacks. Liberty has saddled up. It's armed itself, and it's ready to take a stand. The intelligence war has gone its route. Warren has sent out his messages. We have gotten Adams and Hancock to safety. And now we're standing there at Lexington Green as the sun is coming up. There's 77 or so colonials, 700 British regulars. And the moment of time has changed. It's time for the Americans to stop kneeling to the British crown, the British Parliament. It's time to stand up and make yourself known, to stand up for what's right, to stand up for what you believe in, to stand up for liberty.
And imagine what it takes to make that decision, knowing what you're facing. That's got to be tough, and we talk it with Dave Bowman today with Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live here on WMMB.
This is Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live.
Renewal by Anderson, our sponsor. Nice to have you with us on a Tuesday where Dave Bowman taking us through Liberty 250, April 18th and 19th, 1775, where we're living now as we march toward July 4th of 1776. So, Dave, the midnight ride of Paul Revere et al. Has been accomplished, and we're coming up on the morning of April 19th, and it's about to take place. We'll let you pick it up there.
For me personally, the Battle of Lexington and Concord is it has a very deep meaning to me. Standing on that green at Lexington, are two very young men. One is just 17 years old. The other's a little bit older. One is named Isaac. One is named Ebenezer. And their last name, of course, is Bowman. And yes, they are my ancestors. Ebenezer is I think it's 8 generations ago, great-grandfather. He's 17 years old. I enlisted in the Navy at 17. And I remember thinking to myself, why am I doing this? What is it that's motivating me? And I have that same question for Ebenezer. If there was a DeLorean that I could go back in time, and I showed up on the green, Lexington Green, at about 5 in the morning of April 19th, that's the first question I'd ask is, why are you here? What do you think you're going to... It seems like a strange question to ask. What's the motivation for all of these people who are standing here with their guns? Is it adventure? Is it excitement? Is it any of those things? Or do they really understand? Because I say this to people all the time. When I raised my hand to enlist in the Navy, I didn't really understand. I knew what I was doing. I knew why I was doing it. I didn't really understand anything about the nation, the Constitution, the oath, beyond I had a right to free speech, free religion, and to have a gun. Why are they there? Why did they ride through that night? Why are they standing here this morning? Are they defending their community, their dignity, their inherited rights, and their unwillingness to kneel? This idea that kneeling is showing fealty to something or someone else other than yourself. And they have come here to stand here this morning in the face of the most powerful military in the entire world. These 700 regulars that are marching down on them are not rabble. These are highly trained, very well equipped, very well drilled, and very well led soldiers. I cannot emphasize this enough. They are the best in the world. They are unbeatable in their own minds and in the minds of most military people in the world. In England, over in Parliament, the discussion for the past weeks has been about how sending our army against this rabble will be a simple thing. It will be easy. It will be like a knife through butter. And they're standing there amongst Ebenezer and Isaac and all these other people. It's Captain John Parker. And he will say those famous words, "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless they fire at us first. Don't fire unless fired upon." And then he says those words, Bill, "But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here."
So, Dave, your ancestor and others standing there on the lawn, the order is not to fire unless they're fired upon first. Where are we going from here?
We're not going to spend a lot of time on the actual battle. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of books and articles, and if you're really all that interested in the who moved where, who did what, when, you can find all that. I want to focus on those people. People like Isaac Davis, who's a blacksmith. He's a father. He's a militia commander. He's going to fall this day. There's other men. Thaddeus Bowman, who is not related, but is leading his men as well. Ebenezer, Isaac, Timothy Pickering, and of course a guy by the name of Samuel Whitmore, he's ancient, okay? Whitmore is 78 years old this day. He has seen it all, and yet he's willing to stand up as well. These men have all made this decision to stand and to not kneel before Parliament anymore. No one knows who fired the first shot. No one knows. It's lost to history. Anybody that tells you that they do know is lying to you. They don't know. But what we do know is that within the first minutes of the war, the American Revolutionary War, which, as John Adams will say later, is the moment the actual American Revolution ends, within minutes of that, 8 colonials are dead. 8 Americans have now fallen before breakfast. The British have dispersed the troops at Lexington, the militia at Lexington, and these 700 regulars continue their march on towards Concord, having brushed aside the troops at Lexington. Concord, though, is going to be different. By now, the colonials are, angry, and they are far better organized. And by the time the British reach Concord, they are facing organization, retaliation, and resistance at the North Bridge. This is where Isaac Davis is going to fall, leading his men at the North Bridge. These aren't soldiers, these militiamen. They're farmers, they're tradesmen, they're teenagers. They, in many cases, are veterans of the 7 years, the French and Indian War, 2 decades earlier, a decade and a half earlier. But they are men who are now fighting a war that started before breakfast in Lexington, and they are not going to give up easily. They are not going to surrender. They are not going to back down. And the fight at Concord is much sharper, much deadlier, and it leaves the British confused in many ways. They manage to, they think, accomplish their goal. They burn the stores, what's left of the stores, at Concord. And so they think that they've accomplished their goal. And so now it's time to go back to Boston. And what they don't realize, of course, is that this trip back to Boston is going to be a living hell. They think they're just going to walk in and walk out, and that's not what's going to happen. Even Samuel Whitmore, the 78-year-old guy that I told you about, has had enough. 78 years old, he grabs a flintlock musket, a couple of pistols, and a cutlass, a sword, naval sword, by the way, and he starts going after these retreating British troops. He kills 3 or 4 of them before they attack him. 78 years old, they stab him, they bayonet him, they leave him for dead. But he's not dead, like America. He rises again, and he will actually go on to live until 1793. The retreat is one of the most terrifying things these British soldiers will ever experience. And at the end of the day, they're going to be trapped in Boston.
And we pick it up when we continue with Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. That happens in just moments right here on 92.7 FM WMMB.
Call Bill now, 321-768-1240.
Dave Bowman bringing us Dave Does History. Liberty 250 taking a look at Lexington and Concord. And while the British have accomplished the mission and heading back to Boston, the fight's not over yet. We get back into that momentarily. This weekend on the Florida Roundtable, we're going to talk to the United States Marshal Service about Operation Dragon Eye as they recovered 60 critically and dangerously missing kids in an operation that took out human traffickers, drug dealers, and much, much more. Be an interesting Florida Roundtable this weekend on WMMB. We'll get to your calls for Dave Bowman coming up in moments, but let's get back to the end of this battle. Dave, the Brits think they've accomplished the mission. They took the remaining stores and destroyed those of weapons. Does the British soldier understand the politics of the battle they're fighting? Are they just career guys going out and doing what they're told to do? And, I mean, they're living in these communities as well, right?
Well, they're stationed in these communities. In many cases, they're familiar with this stuff. We're not dealing with the Hessians yet. So these are still British regulars. These are British citizens who may have some understanding. Of course, we don't really have a lot of individual discussion of this, but they're in the British Army, so they take orders. They believe in what the British Army is doing. They believe in what General Gage wants done. Keep in mind, though, that there is no homogenous British attitude towards the colonies. There are many people who feel like we are mistreating them. There are many people who feel like they need to be brought to heel. I'm sure that those same attitudes happen within the British Army. The difference is, of course, they're soldiers, so they follow orders. By the time they get back to Boston, bloodied and exhausted, they had lost a lot that day. They had 73 men killed in this thing, wounded 174, missing 226, 273 total casualties. This was absolutely unheard of. And it was this idea that they had suffered these losses, but they were starting to realize, the British were starting to realize, and certainly Gage started realizing, that the greater loss was not in men and munitions. It was the loss of the illusion that the colonies were going to continue to obey, that somehow these coercive acts, which, by the way, General Gage was against, would force the colonies to obey. The illusion that discipline alone could snuff out a revolution. They had lost, the dream had died at that point. For all practical purposes, the British Empire lost the American colonies that day. It would take, 6 more years of war to settle it all, but reality is, from that moment on, Britain never controlled America. They expected, of course, the British expected, of course, that this would cause the rest of the colonies to rise up against Massachusetts. That was certainly their hope, but that's not what happened. Boston sent out the, hey, we need your help. The rest of America answers. New York, you got anti-king riots, anti-parliamentary riots, not king, anti-parliamentary riots. Pennsylvania, which is heavily Quaker, Bill, the Quakers start having town meetings and forming militia companies because the Quakers have realized that, look, we tried. We tried to be peaceful with these people. We tried to be in agreement with these people. We tried all of these things, and it didn't work. And the Quakers in Pennsylvania start, the people who don't believe in violence.
Yeah, they're pacifists, right? Don't want to take up arms.
Start taking up arms. All across the colonies, all across America, provincial governments begin to take power. All these other royal governors, these other 12 royal governors, are essentially frozen out of everything. They're told, you don't matter anymore. We're electing our own governments. We're letting our own people run things, and you can continue to pretend to be the royal governor, but we're just going to ignore you. And in the meantime, somewhere on the order of about 20,000 militia have shown up to Boston. There's 7,000 British troops in Boston. Somewhere around 20,000 total militia show up around Boston and encircle it. The siege of Boston has begun by April 20th of 1775.
That's a 3-to-1 advantage. Holy cow.
Yeah, it is in general numbers, but not real numbers, because probably there's no training. Half these militia don't even have arms. They certainly don't have, enough bullets, as we're going to find out soon. Even General Washington will refer to them as rabble and dirty and filthy. He doesn't like them. But they're there. And Gage is in a tough bind. He's a man, by the way, Gage, loyal to the crown, but he's also loyal to liberty. He believes in liberty, and he tried all he could to avoid this conflict. He didn't want it. He tried to explain to Parliament, what you're doing is going to cause problems. He pleaded with Parliament, don't do this. And if you're going to do it, I need 20,000 troops, he told them. They said, no, you have the best army in the world. You don't need 20,000 troops. He had pleaded with them for moderation, for understanding. He had warned them that harsher measures were going to backfire. And of course, Parliament, not the king, Parliament completely ignored him. And now we find ourselves in this position where we are. By the way, Margaret Gage, shortly hereafter, will board a ship back to England. And we will pretty much never hear of her again. Gage will never himself make any accusations. He will never whisper anything. He will never bring up anything. But he does quietly send her away to England, and she never returns to America. Was she involved? I think the historical evidence is pretty much yes, but there you go. She's no longer a part of the story at that point. The end of the thing is really the beginning. This war doesn't start with a grand declaration. It begins with fear, conviction, and a few dozen men on a village green. It begins with Paul Revere, Davis, Bowman, Gage. Each represents the choices that people have to make when liberty's on the line. Do we stand for this? Each British soldier has to make their choice. Do they really understand what's going on here? Do they really understand why we're doing all this? But on April 19th, everything is still a little, raw. Blood stains on the green at Lexington. Smoke still drifts over the North Bridge. There are wives that are weeping in silence, children asking, when's Dad coming home? Some never will. From all of that comes purpose. Liberty, turns out, is not born all at once. It's not declared and made real in the same moment. It takes time to build slowly, painfully, one act of courage at a time, one refusal to kneel at a time. And that's where we find ourselves by the evening of April 19th, 1775. Still a year away from declaring anything, but already the fight for liberty has begun.
And we pick it up in 1 minute with your calls here on Bill Mick Live. It's a good edition of Dave Does History as we pursue Liberty 250. Dave, let's get a quick phone call in while we can. Line 1, you're up on Bill Mick Live. Good morning.
Good morning, Bill. Ed in Melbourne.
Yeah, Ed, what are you thinking here?
Well, great history lesson. And that is known, I believe, as the Boston Massacre.
No, different event.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Boston Massacre happened prior to this, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, there was in the Boston anyway, the British really didn't understand what they were up against.
Well, they didn't have any reason to, I don't think. But thanks, Ed. Dave, how you seeing that?
Yeah, the Boston Massacre is 5 years earlier. There is a lot of discussion in Parliament and in Buckingham House about how this is going to go. And there is a very firm belief, Ed's right, to the sense of they don't really understand what they're getting into. They should understand it, but they don't. And even in Parliament, there are people that are saying, look, you're overreacting. And it's kind of interesting because what if they'd have gone to a Commonwealth system in 1775 and said, okay, you guys run yourselves and just be part of us. all of this stuff. We're going to talk next week about this idea of a patriot king. Remember, at this point, the Americans aren't mad at King George yet. They still adore King George. Yes, I said that. April 19th, even after Lexington and Concord, we still think the king is the bee's knees.
Which brings me to a question I had, Dave, which was, this is Parliament's decision all along. The king, how limited was his power? Could he have stopped this if he wanted to, or is it all in Parliament's hands at this point?
Well, that's the question, because as I said, there's this concept known as the Patriot King, and the idea here is that the king can override Parliament. Now, up to this point, ostensibly, the king has approved of Parliament's actions, his ministers' actions. But there is going to come a moment where we're going to say, look, maybe the king can solve this. Maybe the king can interject some common sense into all this thing. And remember that when we write the Declaration of Independence, we're not going to complain about Parliament. Who are we going to complain about? So, in a little bit of foreshadowing here, you can kind of see where he's going to go with this. He's not going to go along.
That is interesting. I wish I'd have been a little bit older, just like I wish when my parents took us to Gettysburg, right? I wish I'd have been older when I was at Lexington and Concord. I would have appreciated it more. I would have paid more attention. As it was, I was a 5, 6, 7-year-old kid walking around wondering, why are we looking at this marble and standing here in the grass? I want to go to the swimming pool. Let's go.
Yeah. And I find that fascinating to go back to places like that to see them. For me, history is very tactile. I like to go and put my hands on things. I like to see them for myself. Even, sure, it's the 21st century. I can look at pictures. I can look at stuff. But there's just something about being there. And for me, going there, when I do get to go there, to know that Ebenezer was standing here, I've been to the Holy Land, and to stand in those places there's a certain feeling to it. And I would imagine I'm going to have that same feeling again.
Yeah, well, and see, that's a connection to your family history that I'll never have. We can't trace ours back that far. We might get into the late 1800s with my family, nothing prior to that. So it does make a difference. But
they still connect to you, Bill, because they're still the people who refuse to kneel anymore. They refuse.
Absolutely. There's no doubt.
This is where America becomes America in reality and becomes who we are. And it all comes back to making that choice to stand up. They could have just stayed in bed and said, no, we're not going to do that. But they didn't. They got up and they stood for what they knew they had to do.
Well, as you said, next week we look at the idea of a patriot king. America's still hoping, well, the colonists, even though they've become Americans on this April 19th, they're still hoping for a peaceful resolution here.
Yeah.
Right?
And they will send a petition saying, we'd like peace.
Yeah. Renewal by Anderson brought you the hour. Dave Bowman brought you the history. Dave, we'll see you next Tuesday. Thanks, man.
We'll see you then.